Mall Studios. This is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
All right, 25 minutes before 10 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. Hope you're having a good day. It's Memorial Day, and we have a lady on the phone who probably remembers people this Memorial Day in, I'm not going to say more than others, but just as profound as any of us. Joanne Steen has a book called We Regret to Inform You, a survival guide for Gold Star parents and those who support them. Joanne is an instructor on grief and loss with a specialty in military and line-of-duty losses. She's a board-certified counselor, a military widow herself, so she got those horrible words spoken to her at one point. She's the founder of Grief Solutions, a training company on grief, loss, and resilience. She's an award-winning author, the recipient of the Distinguished Authors of the Year Award from the United States Naval Institute. Joanne Steen, the title alone gives us reason to pause for a moment. We regret to inform you against the title. Joanne, it's an honor to have you on the show. Good morning.
Thank you so much, and it's both an honor and a pleasure for me to be here.
Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Virginia Beach, Virginia, which is just a stone's throw from Norfolk, which is the home of the U.S. Atlantic Fleet.
So the book is for all of us?
The book was written specifically for Gold Star parents, and in this journey since my own husband was killed, I realized, Larry, that there's not a lot of resources, dedicated resources on military loss for families. I learned that firsthand. So the book came about because I was speaking someplace, and a Gold Star mom came up to me afterwards, and she said, "When are you going to write a book for us?" She said, "Parents need a survival guide too." And that was the genesis for me to start this book. But while the book is for Gold Star parents, who are those mothers and fathers who have lost a son or daughter in the line of duty, I came to realize that I couldn't just write to them alone. So in it, there's a whole entire section entitled What You Need to Know, What to Expect, What to Say, What not to say, and best practices on how to help. And that's for anybody who comes in contact with either families of the fallen, whether it's a personal connection, whether it's in a leadership position, a government position. This is the down and dirty for them on what they need to know.
Can I ask you about your husband?
Surely, and I'll be happy to share, but I do want to tell you that's not about me. He was the catalyst in terms of turning a traumatic event into a greater good. But his name was Lieutenant Ken Steen. We were newlyweds, and he was a Navy helicopter pilot, had also proudly served in the Marine Corps, and he was on a training mission when something went horribly wrong. The helicopter exploded, and I lost a crew. We lost a crew of 7 on a Father's Day weekend a long time ago.
Wow. Well, I'm so sorry about that. Well, I know you didn't want to make it about him, and I didn't intend for that. But
Sure.
but I'm wondering
Right.
if this book could have even been possible if it were not for that event.
Well, the truth is no, because like most people, I was very unaware of military loss. That was the first thing. And the second thing is a loss like this is something that's just so unconceivable. And I don't think I would have been able to embrace the topic. It's a tough subject, and we don't want to go down that road with tough subjects. But as I said, there was an opportunity for a greater good to come out of it, and for that I'm grateful.
You use the phrase deployment delayed grief. What exactly is that, please?
Oh, gosh, thank you for asking about that. Deployment delayed grief is a particular type of a response that basically military families can understand really well. And there's 2 ways of looking at this. The first is, let's say that your loved one did die while he or she was on deployment. Well, given the nature and given the distance, nature of military loss and the distance of it, it's not uncommon for families to think, well, maybe the military made a mistake. Maybe my loved one was different. Maybe they're on a mission where they can't call home or they can't email, or maybe something's going on with them. But you hold out this last glimmer of hope that this horrible, horrible news isn't true. And so a lot of times when the deployment comes home, it's not uncommon to realize then that your loved one's dead and that, she's not coming home. And really, grief sometimes hits you again and anew in a really hard way.
Wow. And does the passage of time make it any easier, or is that just something we all like to believe?
That's a great question, because if I could eliminate about 10 phrases from our American vocabulary, one of them would be time heals all wounds. In reality, time heals nothing. But what it does is time give us the opportunity to do the work that grief demands. Because getting through grief is a very active process. We need to feel those feelings. We need to go through the emotions. We need to make that progress. So I think time heals. Time heals all wounds is just a cliche that we can eliminate.
One of the things that we hear a lot, Robert and I are not psychologists, but we do a radio show and we speak to a lot of authors who are psychologists.
Sure.
And one of the things they talk about with grief, the first thing that happens after somebody dies is anger. And I have a question about that, specifically about the family of the departed soldier or sailor, who is a military family, and therefore they were very much in favor of the person going into the service, versus the family that was really not a military family. No, don't do that. You don't need to be doing that. You can find a job here. You don't need to be joining the military. But the person goes on anyway. Is there a different anger from the family that is military versus the one that maybe the one child decided to join the army or whatever and didn't come back?
That's a great question. My experience with anger is this, and it's a common reaction in grief. It's one of the universal reactions. And we have different types of anger. But when we look at anger per se, and we look at military loss, one of the things that happens is you have to somehow find meaning, make meaning of not only this person's life, but their death. So I think when the difference between, let's say, a family who has a strong military background is understands the culture, and one that doesn't, is that after that death takes place, we all, as survivors, look to find meaning, and very often that meaning comes from our loved ones, active intent to basically serve our country, to be part of something of a greater good. So I find very few that are angry, let's say, over joining the military service, because that in turn helps them to find meaning in a very the death of a very young person. Most average age of our military who die in the line of duty is 28.
Wow.
Sometimes the military families will find out on their own through the social media or the instantaneous reporting of news stories. How do you get to them to help them cope?
Yeah, finding out or putting things out on social media, and we all do this before all the facts are gathered, usually isn't a good thing, because I learned something as a military instructor, and that's nothing is ever as good or as bad as the first report. And very often that goes out, and it's like playing the old game of telephone. It gets changed, it gets modified. So when the military does come to your door, they're there in an official capacity, and the news they deliver is fact-based. And so what you're getting are the facts. Everything else may be some little inkling of it. And again, it doesn't really serve a good purpose. I know I was talking to one military widow who had been told via social media that her husband was one of the ones who was killed. And she also knew, because she was a military family, she also knew that they weren't going to make notification to 6 a.m. So she sat the whole night,
oh my gosh,
basically in anticipation of hearing this. And then when the morning came and there was no announcement, there's no notification, she couldn't figure out what was going on.
Oh my gosh.
In her case, ultimately her husband was able to get in contact with her and said, "We took casualties." And her first comment was, "Well, I thought you were dead." Because that had been that bit of information that usually with the best of intention had been passed on. But again, it goes back down to nothing is ever as good or as bad as the first report.
Wow.
Memorial Day is just, everywhere, so widespread. And when you do lose a child, you never ever forget, but it has to be the most devastating memory you can have on days like today.
Sure. And Memorial Day has gotten to be a real hot topic with families of the fallen because it is a federal holiday. It is the day that has been observed for the last 150 years to both remember and honor the fallen. And unfortunately, over the passage of time, we've gone from having a day of remembrance to having an event, which is Memorial Day weekend. So families of the fallen and those veterans who have lost somebody that was close to them, they find today to be a very important and potent day of remembrance. And sometimes it's hard for them to see all of the hoopla that goes on that really isn't focused for the fallen. And we're not asking for everyone to walk around and be solemn and if they're at a funeral all day long.
Right.
But what we do want is just to show that that the service members are remembered, that their service is appreciated, and that they're not forgotten. And essentially, the best thing you can do is to a family is just say, you know what, we're not going to forget. So one of the things that happens is that it's very common, without thinking, to say Happy Memorial Day. And if you think about it, it's really not the right thing to say.
No, it's not.
No, and I'm guilty of that too.
Yeah.
We actually have a news piece this morning where a lady is telling us not to say that. What would be a better thing to say?
Yeah, here's what I say, and I've done this. I just was traveling recently. I've done this, and I've had moderate success, and I have done it before. Is that when someone says to me, "Hey, Happy Memorial Day," I don't take offense, because I know where they're coming from. There's no malice intended. But what I do say is, enjoy the long weekend, and when you get a chance, remember the fallen.
Do you, in your book, do you advocate for therapy sessions for the families with a therapist or for other families that have lost their children before them in battle?
That's another good question, Robin. Yes and yes. Okay. I think one of the things that happens with military loss is that you become very isolated. So for families of the fallen, it's hard for them to engage, let's say, with other families who have lost somebody who's non-military, because there's just a whole different set of circumstances you deal with. Hold on, please. Hold on. I'm back and I'm better.
Okay.
But however, when it comes to, I'm a big believer in reaching out for help when it comes to counseling, and simply because if I were to hurt my back and the over-the-counter stuff didn't work, I'd go to a doctor to help me with me. And the same thing goes with loss. And if I'm stuck on something or it's just overwhelming me, I'm going to go to somebody to help me fix that. What I found to be effective, because I had the personal experience of going to a counselor who knew nothing about military loss, and I found that was isolating more than helpful. So what I have done, and and this book will help also parents, is that if you do end up with a counselor that you like, and it doesn't have to be for years and years, it could be just a couple sessions, take the book with you, give it to them, and just say, hey, this is something that can help you to understand me as we move forward.
I'm sorry, Robin.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, when we're talking about support and the comfort of being with people who've gone through something similar, does your family extend beyond your family and go to the Navy, for example? Do you, like when you go to an event, like a Memorial Day event, are you more comfortable? Is it better to be, we'll go, all the Navy people are going to sit over here, why don't you join us? Does that help?
Sure.
Does that help?
Oh, gosh, yes. And here's why. It's really simple. Here's why it's helpful is because the military, the establishment of the military, the community, the culture, is a connection to your loved one. Because, your son thought it was important enough to sign up. And so that service branch that your daughter, chose to join is a connection to them. And yes, it makes a big difference.
How do you help a family move forward and they not keep this guilt that their child has passed away, but they still have to move forward in their life with their other children?
Oh gosh, that's a good question, because what happens is when we lose anybody, military or civilian, we have a tendency of putting our loved ones on the fast track to sainthood. And so that, the dead person becomes the idealized perfect person. And so what's important is that when you deal with a family, is that initially it's a part of grief, particularly sudden and traumatic grief, is the family needs to talk about it. And you know what? You might not be a talker, you might not be a listener, because it's a highly emotive subject, and that's okay. But what we can do is, when we are with families of the fallen, is to use their name, to mention their name, to say, yes, I remember your son Tony. And then say, you know what, I didn't know him well, but when I've met him, I always felt good in talking to him. Or another way that we can help is, let's say the anniversary of the death comes up, and people say, people may reach out to you and say, well, I'm thinking about you at this difficult time. Really, my main thought is, really, call me up and say, hey, today's the day that Ken was killed, and I remember, and I know you're thinking about it, so I just wanted to let you know. And that's perfect, because the world moves on. And what I found with all the families I've worked with is that it goes from being the memories of their loved one goes from being tragic as they move forward. Notice I didn't say move on, but they move forward to those memories being very therapeutic and very comfortable. We love to tell stories and we love to laugh.
On the September 11th ceremonies, the people who read the names of all of those who died on that day are usually family members of those who died on that day. And it's been now 18 years, so going on 18 years. And some of those who were children at the beginning are now adults and have actually followed in their father's footsteps or their mother's footsteps. And I'm talking about the firefighters, not necessarily the office workers, obviously.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, when that happens in the military, when the child of somebody who was killed in the line of duty decides to follow in his father's or mother's footsteps, is there kind of grief or fear? Is there something going on in that parent's mind that might not be in another parent's mind?
Yes. The short answer is yes. And I've spoken with a number of parents who have served, proudly served, and their child has served and lost their lives in that service. And parents run the gamut of emotions from, two things you can depend on with grief. You can depend usually on anger, you can depend on some emotion, and you can depend on guilt. And guilt has a really long shelf life, and guilt most of the time is irrational. And so, it is. When you think about it, guilt's irrational, where the dad says to me, well, I served, but, if I hadn't served, my son wouldn't have followed in my footsteps. And you say, yeah, that might be the case, but, was your service to country a good thing to do? Was that a benefit? And they say, well, yeah. I said, well, he was following the good things that you did, the goodness that you did, the patriotism, the signing up. But you weren't responsible for his death because he signed up. Were you? And that's a hard thing, because, like I said, we think irrationally about it. Now, I was just down at 9/11 yesterday. I had some time before my flight out, so I thought, of all the things I could do in New York City, what did I want to do? And I went down to the 9/11 memorial. I didn't go inside, there wasn't time, but I did go to the two footprints of the buildings. And what I was struck with was, much like the Vietnam Wall, it is still a very living and personal memorial. And there were still flowers, there were still little flowers stuck on the names, there were pictures. Very powerful, very still a living memorial.
How do you speak to organizations and groups in comparison to how you speak to a family?
Oh, that's a great question, because hands down, the first thing that an organization or a group really wants to know is something that's going to meet their personal needs. And so that's going to be, hey, what do I say? What do I not say? They're going to want to be better prepared and to develop those skills and have that skill set with them to say, hey, when this should come about, in my world here, what do I do? So what they want to know is they want to know what to say. They want to know how to help. When I'm with families that have fallen, it's usually really conversational, and I usually just say, I've lost somebody in the military, but you lost somebody personal to you. So, what was it like for you? Tell me about that. Because although we share that very strong common bond of losing a service member, grief is a different experience depending upon three things: upon what your reaction was, what your relationship was, to those person that died, whether the death was sudden or unexpected. And this is really important because a sudden and unexpected death is going to influence how you respond initially. How the loved one died, what were the circumstances, how were they killed, is going to impact what you have to contend with down the road.
Yeah, because you probably can try to visualize what he or she went through in those last moments, whether it was instant or there was any suffering, that kind of thing must go through your mind all the time, right?
Yeah, sure, but that's a good thing, because it's common practice with a sudden traumatic death for survivors to get really obsessed with the details, and they replay it, and those that are outside of the realm think, oh, that's really morbid. Why are they doing that for? They're just upsetting themselves. But you replay the details in your mind again and again, and you search for information and you hunt for facts until somewhere in the back of your brain, I don't know how our brain works, but that psyche says, I know what that ending is going to be. And then it begins to lose its grip on you, and you begin to realize that that it is losing its grip. Your mind knows what's coming.
Joanne, were you a counselor before you lost Ken?
Gosh, no, Larry. I was an engineer.
Oh my gosh! Wow. So do you think taking on the role of a counselor helps? Like it's almost like when you teach somebody how to play piano, you sort of learn how to play piano better or whatever. Does being a counselor counsel you? Does it kind of work both ways?
Yes and no. I found that what my technical background did for me was it made me in more of a position to see the big picture, to take in information perhaps with less bias, and to look at, okay, this is I can look at stuff now with some emotive bent, but I can also look at the bigger picture of it. The downside of something like that is I prefer, there comes a point in time where you have to realize that for your own benefit, you need to not focus so much on the death. And this is true of anyone. So when I think of my late husband, Ken, I don't want to focus on his death. I want to remember those things about him in his very short life that were good. Mm-hmm. And he did not die in combat. Okay, and people will say, well, he, and sometimes that is looked down on, and many families feel like this. They say, well, we understand the combat piece because, you go to combat, you're fighting an enemy, and they're killed. But here's for instance, more than 23,000 personnel have died in the line of duty, according to the Department of Defense, since 9/11. Okay, of that 23,000, 7,000 of them died in Iraq and Afghanistan. Okay, but that leaves 16,000 that have died in the line of duty, serving their country, but were killed or died not in combat.
Wow. That's huge. Why didn't I have any idea it was so big?
Most people don't, because those aren't the deaths that get noticed a lot.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Joanne, you would be proud, I think. On Thursdays, we have a show dedicated to veterans. It's run by veterans and hosted by veterans. And they always begin the show by naming the veterans who have died since the previous week, or who at least we found out about during the previous week. And in fact, they have a ceremony here in our town every 3 months for all of the veterans who have passed.
Excellent.
Okay, the book is called We Regret to Inform You. It is written by our guest, Joanne Steen. I found it on Amazon, and brand new book. Do you have a different website you'd like to direct us to?
I do. If someone would like to get in touch with me, you can go to Grief Solutions, www.griefsolutions, all one word, .net. Grief Solutions. Again, that's a positive focus. We do have solutions to grief, and you can find out more about. You can contact me personally. You can find out more about speaking opportunities. You can find out more about training, and basically just learning more about how we can effectively not only help the families of our fallen, but also help ourselves as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Joanne. Thank you for taking time to be with us today.
My pleasure.
And I don't know how to say Happy Memorial Day. I can't remember how you told me, but thank you, and thank you for what you do.
Thank you. Enjoy the weekend, enjoy the Memorial Day, and take a moment to remember the fallen. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. We will be right back.
Thank you.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Here is your 1-minute news brief. Governor Ron DeSantis is in Israel with a delegation that includes education officials, business leaders, lawmakers, and the head of the state's tourism marketing agency. Authorities are investigating a deadly shooting that happened in Fort McCoy on Saturday afternoon. Deputies with the Lake County Sheriff's Office responded to a state